In early June 2017, a married couple from Toronto, Canada, decided to celebrate their new life together with a special trip. The couple, who had recently exchanged vows in front of family and friends, chose the Bahamas as the destination for their honeymoon. Known for its clear waters, white sand beaches, and warm climate, the Bahamas has long been considered one of the most popular vacation spots in the Caribbean. The husband, a 34-year-old professional working in the financial sector, and his wife, a 32-year-old healthcare worker, had been in a relationship for several years before their marriage. Friends described them as quiet, hardworking, and family-oriented. Their wedding had been a modest but joyful occasion, attended by close relatives and longtime friends who wished them a long and happy future together. For the couple, the honeymoon trip was not only a chance to enjoy the tropical environment but also an opportunity to take a break from their busy work schedules back in Canada. They booked a week-long stay at a beachfront resort on one of the Bahamian islands. The choice of destination reflected their shared interest in travel, relaxation, and exploring new cultures. The Bahamas itself, an island nation consisting of hundreds of islands and cays, attracts millions of tourists each year. Beyond its scenic landscapes, it also provides a setting where cultures mix, with visitors arriving from North America, Europe, and beyond. Resorts often advertise the country as a safe and peaceful location for honeymooners and families alike. However, like many tourist destinations, the islands also face challenges related to crime, particularly in areas away from the main resorts. While most visitors experience no issues, occasional incidents involving theft, disputes, or violence do occur. For this couple, the decision to travel to the Bahamas was made with optimism and the expectation of a memorable start to their marriage. Their arrival on the island marked the beginning of what was intended to be a period of joy and celebration. The trip started with typical vacation activities, enjoying the beach, dining at local restaurants, and taking part in excursions offered by the resort. At first glance, everything appeared normal and uneventful, reflecting the experience of many other tourists who traveled there for similar reasons. Yet, behind this ordinary vacation plan, events were set in motion that would ultimately turn their journey into something far different from what they had imagined. What began as a honeymoon in paradise would later become the subject of headlines and legal proceedings, leaving lasting effects not only on the couple and their families but also on the local community where the tragedy took place. The story centers on a Canadian couple who had just begun their married life. The husband, Daniel Harper, was 34 years old. He worked as a financial advisor at a mid-sized firm in Toronto. Colleagues described him as reliable, professional, and often reserved in nature. He had built his career steadily over the years and was seen as someone who valued stability and careful planning. Friends noticed that he rarely spoke about personal issues but was always ready to offer advice when asked. His wife, Emily Foster, was 32 years old. She had been working as a nurse at a community hospital in Toronto. Unlike Daniel, she was more outgoing and social. Her co-workers recalled that she often spoke warmly about her patients and seemed dedicated to her profession. Emily had a close relationship with her family, visiting her parents frequently and keeping in contact with her siblings. Daniel and Emily had known each other for several years before marriage. They met through mutual friends at a small social gathering and gradually built a relationship that many described as steady and practical. They were not known for extravagant lifestyles but rather for focusing on work, family, and long-term goals. After years of dating, Daniel proposed, and the two planned a wedding that was simple but meaningful. The wedding took place in Toronto in late May 2017. It was held at a small banquet hall with around 100 guests, mostly family and close friends. Those who attended remembered the event as warm and traditional. Emily wore a classic white dress, while Daniel chose a dark suit. The ceremony was followed by speeches, a modest dinner, and dancing. Guests later recalled that the couple seemed calm and ready to begin the next stage of life together. Soon after the wedding, Daniel and Emily finalized their honeymoon plans. They decided on the Bahamas, a choice influenced by Emily's desire to experience a beach destination and Daniel's interest in visiting a location outside of North America. They booked a package through a travel agency that included flights, a stay at a resort, and several excursions. The package was set for 1 week, beginning in early June. Upon arrival in Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, couple was greeted by the typical warm weather of the islands. From the airport, they were transported to their resort located near the beach. The resort offered amenities such as a pool, multiple restaurants, and access to guided tours. Their first days were spent exploring the resort facilities, walking on the beach, and adjusting to the slower pace of island life. Witnesses later stated that the couple appeared content. Other guests recalled seeing them during breakfast at the resort's main dining hall, usually seated together and engaged in quiet conversation. They also joined group tours organized by the resort. One of these included a boat excursion to nearby cays, where they swam and observed marine life. Another excursion involved visiting local markets, where Emily purchased handmade souvenirs. Outside the resort, the Bahamas presented a mixture of experiences for visitors. Tourist zones were filled with shops, bars, and restaurants. The islands attracted travelers from North America, Europe, and other regions. However, locals were also aware of certain risks, particularly in less crowded areas. Crime, including theft and robbery, was not unknown, and tourists were often reminded by both travel agencies and resort staff to stay within safe zones and avoid walking alone late at night. During the first few days, Daniel and Emily seemed to follow these general guidelines. Their activities mostly took place during the day, and they returned to the resort by evening. Photos later recovered from their phones showed beach sunsets, meals at restaurants, and casual walks along the shore. To family and friends back home, the couple appeared to be enjoying a standard honeymoon trip. Communication with relatives in Canada remained frequent. Emily exchanged messages with her sister, describing the weather and the food. Daniel sent short updates to a colleague, confirming that he would be back at work the following week. These exchanges painted the image of a couple engaged in ordinary travel routines, with no visible signs of conflict or trouble. As the honeymoon progressed, however, subtle differences in the couple's behavior began to emerge. Some resort staff later recalled that Daniel seemed more withdrawn during meals, while Emily appeared more enthusiastic about joining activities. While these observations were not unusual by themselves, they would later become relevant in the context of what unfolded. The couple's initial days in the Bahamas reflected the common pattern of many honeymoon trips. They blended leisure with light exploration, enjoyed the resort environment, and stayed in contact with their loved ones. The setting was calm, the weather was favorable, and their schedule remained consistent. Nothing in their routine during this early stage suggested that the trip would take an unexpected direction. The background of Daniel and Emily, combined with their initial activities on the island, provides the foundation for understanding what happened next. They were two individuals beginning a new phase of life, traveling in a foreign country known for its beauty but not without risks. The initial situation appeared ordinary and uneventful, giving no clear warning of the difficulties that would soon emerge. After several days in the Bahamas, Daniel and Emily had settled into a routine at the resort. They spent mornings walking along the beach, afternoons swimming or joining excursions, and evenings dining at either the resort's restaurants or nearby establishments. The honeymoon had followed the pattern of a typical vacation, with no outward sign of conflict. On the fourth evening of their stay, the couple left the resort to explore more of Nassau. They decided to have dinner at a local restaurant recommended by another tourist. The restaurant was located a short distance from the main tourist strip, in an area where both visitors and locals gathered. According to staff, Daniel and Emily arrived shortly after 7 p.m. They ordered seafood and shared a bottle of wine. Witnesses described them as polite and generally quiet, with Emily speaking more often than Daniel. After finishing their meal, the couple left the restaurant and walked toward a nearby bar. This bar was less crowded than the restaurants near the resort. It was here that events began to shift. Several accounts later indicated that Daniel and Emily were seen arguing quietly at their table. The disagreement did not appear loud or violent, but it was noticeable to those sitting nearby. Some patrons recalled Emily gesturing with her hands as if trying to explain something, while Daniel remained mostly silent. The precise cause of the disagreement was never fully established. Later investigations suggested it may have involved personal matters that had surfaced during the trip. Although the exchange ended without incident inside the bar, it marked the first visible sign of tension between the couple. Around 10 p.m., Daniel and Emily left the bar. Instead of returning directly to the resort, they chose to walk along a quieter street that led toward the shoreline. It was at this point that the situation became more complex. According to investigators, a group of young men was present in the area. They were not directly connected to the bar but had been seen lingering near the street earlier that evening. As the couple walked, one of the men reportedly attempted to speak to Emily. The exchange appeared casual at first, but Daniel intervened. Words were exchanged and the tone quickly shifted. Witnesses later reported hearing raised voices, though the exact content of the argument remained unclear. The interaction ended with Daniel guiding Emily away from the group, and the couple continued walking. Although no immediate harm occurred, this brief encounter introduced an element of unease. Daniel appeared upset afterward while Emily tried to calm him. Security cameras from nearby shops captured part of their walk back toward the main road, showing the couple in visible disagreement. By the time they returned to the resort, it was close to midnight. Staff at the reception noted that Emily seemed tired, while Daniel appeared agitated. They went straight to their room without further interaction with others. This night would later be identified as a turning point in the trip. The following morning, their behavior seemed different. Resort staff recalled that during breakfast, Daniel and Emily barely spoke to each other. Emily spent part of the morning by the pool, reading and talking briefly with another guest. Daniel, meanwhile, was seen walking alone along the beach. That evening, they joined a group excursion to a nearby island. Photos from the trip showed them posing together, though observers noted their smiles seemed less natural than in earlier pictures. Other guests later recalled that Emily appeared friendly and interactive, while Daniel remained quiet. 2 days later, another incident occurred. The couple once again left the resort at night, this time to attend a music event in Nassau. Reports indicate that alcohol consumption played a role in what followed. At the event, Daniel was seen drinking more than usual, while Emily spoke with several people in the crowd. A small dispute arose when Daniel accused Emily of being too friendly with another attendee. Witnesses described the argument as heated but not physical. Emily eventually convinced Daniel to leave, and they returned to the resort in silence. The next morning, Emily called her sister in Canada. During the call, she mentioned that Daniel had been in a difficult mood during the trip. While she did not describe any violence, she hinted at tension between them. This phone call later became significant in the investigation, as it provided one of the last external accounts of Emily's state of mind before the tragedy. By this stage, the honeymoon no longer resembled the calm vacation they had planned. The combination of personal disagreements, alcohol consumption, and interactions with strangers had created a growing sense of instability. On the sixth night, the couple once again went out. This time, they chose a smaller restaurant near the shoreline. They arrived around 8 p.m., ordered dinner, and shared a few drinks. Witnesses later testified that they seemed tense, speaking little during the meal. After dinner, they began walking back toward the resort. It was on this walk that the triggering event occurred. According to investigators, the couple's argument intensified. Daniel and Emily stopped on a less crowded street, where they exchanged words and raised voices. A witness passing by later stated that Emily appeared upset, while Daniel's posture suggested anger. Moments later, neighbors nearby reported hearing a loud disturbance. When authorities eventually reviewed the area, they discovered evidence suggesting that the argument had escalated into a physical confrontation. While the exact sequence remained disputed, it was clear that the situation had crossed a boundary from verbal disagreement into violence. This incident set the stage for the tragedy that followed. What began as a honeymoon trip filled with ordinary activities had shifted into a pattern of disputes and growing tension. The quiet disagreement in a bar, the late-night walk, the confrontation with strangers, and the disputes during social outings all built toward the critical moment when the relationship between Daniel and Emily entered dangerous territory. The triggering event did not end in immediate fatal consequences, but it marked the point where their story diverged from a normal vacation. It transformed into a chain of events that would lead to a violent outcome, legal proceedings, and lasting consequences for both families. The days following the argument on the quiet street revealed a noticeable shift in Daniel and Emily's relationship. What had begun as small disagreements earlier in the trip was now more visible to others around them. Resort staff and fellow guests observed changes in their behavior that reflected growing distance between the couple. On the morning after their confrontation, Daniel appeared at breakfast alone. Emily arrived about 30 minutes later, choosing to sit at another table. While such behavior could have been interpreted as a casual choice, staff members who had been observing the couple since their arrival noted that it was unusual. Until then, the two had almost always eaten together. Later that afternoon, Emily joined a group of tourists for a snorkeling excursion. Daniel did not accompany her. According to a guide, Emily seemed engaged and cheerful during the trip, speaking with others and asking questions about the marine environment. However, she also appeared distracted at times, checking her phone frequently. It was later confirmed that she had exchanged several messages with her sister back in Canada during this period. Daniel, meanwhile, remained at the resort. He was seen reading by the pool and walking along the beach alone. Another guest attempted to start a conversation with him, but Daniel reportedly responded with brief answers before returning to his book. This behavior contrasted with Emily's social demeanor and suggested that the couple was spending more time apart. By the evening, the two were seen together again, dining at one of the resort's restaurants. Witnesses described the atmosphere between them as tense. They spoke little during the meal and their expressions appeared serious. A staff member later recalled that Emily smiled politely at the waiter but rarely directed her attention toward Daniel. The following day, June 8th, the couple joined a guided tour of historic sites in Nassau. This excursion lasted several hours and involved walking through crowded areas. Photographs taken by other tourists showed Daniel and Emily standing close together but not interacting. While other couples in the group posed with their arms around each other, Daniel and Emily appeared distant. Tension became more apparent later that evening. The couple attended a small event at the resort featuring live music. According to witnesses, Daniel consumed several drinks during the performance. As the evening progressed, Emily attempted to join in conversations with other guests, but Daniel's mood seemed increasingly negative. At one point, the two engaged in another quiet but intense argument. A guest seated nearby overheard Daniel questioning Emily about her interactions with others, while Emily responded with frustration. The argument ended with Daniel leaving the event early, while Emily remained for some time before returning to their room. The staff at the resort grew aware of the couple's strained relationship. While no direct complaints were filed, several employees noticed patterns of avoidance and disagreement. Emily was often seen alone during the day, while Daniel appeared withdrawn. Their interactions as a couple no longer resembled the relaxed behavior expected of newlyweds on a honeymoon. On June 9th, the couple took another walk outside the resort. This time, they visited a local market during the afternoon. Witnesses later recalled that Daniel appeared watchful and distant, while Emily interacted with vendors, purchasing small items and souvenirs. At one stall, an observer noticed that Daniel and Emily engaged in another brief dispute, though it ended quickly without attracting much attention. By now, Emily's communication with her family had grown more frequent. She exchanged multiple messages with her sister and spoke to her mother by phone. While she did not explicitly describe violence, she hinted at difficulties in her marriage. One message mentioned that Daniel had become increasingly controlling and seemed uncomfortable when she interacted with others. Daniel, in contrast, spoke less with colleagues or friends in Canada. When he did, his messages were short and formal, often related to work matters. There were no outward signs from his communications that anything unusual was happening. The real escalation occurred on the evening of June 10th. That night, Daniel and Emily attended a dinner at the resort. Witnesses described the dinner as tense, with minimal conversation. Afterward, the couple returned to their room earlier than usual. What happened behind closed doors was later pieced together from evidence and testimony. Neighbors in adjacent rooms reported hearing raised voices coming from Daniel and Emily's suite. The argument lasted nearly 30 minutes. While the exact content of their exchange could not be determined, it was clear that the disagreement was heated. The following morning, Emily appeared alone at breakfast again. Her demeanor was quiet, and she avoided prolonged conversations. Later in the day, she visited the beach and spent time swimming, while Daniel remained in the room. This pattern of separation continued for most of the day. On June 11th, another major incident occurred. The couple once again left the resort in the evening, heading toward Nassau's downtown area. They stopped at a restaurant for dinner, where witnesses reported that they spoke little during the meal. Afterward, they walked along the streets, where their disagreement escalated once more. This time, the confrontation drew the attention of a passerby who later testified that Emily appeared visibly upset, while Daniel looked angry. Later that night, resort staff noticed Emily returning alone. She spoke briefly with a receptionist, asking about transportation options to the airport. When asked if she was planning to leave, she replied vaguely, saying she just wanted information. This detail later became important during the investigation, as it suggested that Emily was considering ending the trip early. The days that followed showed no improvement. On June 12th, Daniel and Emily spent most of the day apart. Emily participated in another excursion with a group of tourists, while Daniel stayed at the resort. Staff noticed Daniel pacing in the lobby during the afternoon, appearing restless. That evening, the couple dined separately, Emily with a group she had met during the excursion and Daniel alone. By June 13th, the situation had reached a breaking point. The couple was scheduled to return to Canada in 2 days, but the atmosphere between them was increasingly unstable. Observers described Daniel as tense and withdrawn, while Emily appeared conflicted, alternating between social engagement and visible stress. The rising tension over these days marked the transition from isolated arguments to a continuous pattern of conflict. Small disagreements had become larger confrontations, and moments of silence had turned into visible separation. While no single incident provided clear evidence of what was to come, the accumulation of disputes, strained communication, and emotional distance created a fragile environment. This period, defined by repeated arguments, avoidance, and Emily's consideration of leaving early, set the stage for the tragedy that would unfold. The honeymoon, which had started with calm days by the beach, had now become a series of disputes that revealed deeper issues in their relationship. By June 14th, the couple's final full day in the Bahamas had arrived. Their return flight to Toronto was scheduled for the following morning. While the trip had begun with excitement, the series of disagreements and tensions that unfolded during the week had left their relationship visibly strained. That morning, resort staff noticed Daniel and Emily having breakfast together, though their interaction remained minimal. They spoke little and both seemed distracted. Emily spent time looking at her phone, while Daniel appeared focused on his food. Other guests described the atmosphere at their table as cold and distant, unlike the warmth typically associated with newlyweds. Later in the day, Emily joined a group for a beach excursion, while Daniel stayed behind at the resort. Witnesses reported that Emily was quiet but polite, participating in the activities and engaging in light conversation with others. Daniel, meanwhile, was seen sitting alone by the pool and later returning to the couple's room. The evening of June 14th marked the turning point. Daniel and Emily decided to have dinner together at a local restaurant outside the resort, perhaps as a final outing before their departure. They left the resort around 7:30 p.m. and walked to the restaurant, which was located near the shoreline. Witnesses described the dinner as tense. The couple ordered food but exchanged few words. At one point, a server recalled Emily looking frustrated while Daniel appeared stern. After finishing their meal, the couple began walking back toward the resort. It was during this walk that their final argument occurred. According to later witness testimony, the dispute escalated more quickly than previous ones. A passerby reported hearing raised voices and seeing Emily step away from Daniel as if trying to create distance. Daniel followed closely, and the argument continued along a quieter street. At approximately 9:15 p.m., residents living nearby heard a loud disturbance. Some described it as shouting, followed by the sound of a struggle. Concerned by the noise, one resident looked outside and saw two figures arguing near the streetlight. While visibility was limited, the witness recalled seeing one of them push the other. Moments later, the scene went quiet. Shortly afterward, emergency calls were placed reporting a possible incident. When authorities arrived, they discovered Emily lying on the ground with severe injuries. Despite immediate efforts to provide medical assistance, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Daniel was found nearby, visibly shaken. The discovery shocked both the local community and the resort where the couple had been staying. Word of the incident spread quickly among guests, many of whom had interacted with Daniel and Emily earlier in the week. For them, the sudden transition from seeing the couple at dinners and excursions to hearing of a fatal outcome was difficult to comprehend. Police began questioning Daniel immediately. At the scene, he provided inconsistent accounts of what had happened. Initially, he stated that Emily had fallen during an argument. Later, his version of events shifted, and he claimed that the confrontation had escalated unexpectedly. Investigators noted discrepancies between his statements and the physical evidence at the scene. Witness testimony also played a significant role. Residents who had heard or seen parts of the altercation reported raised voices and signs of physical conflict. Combined with forensic evidence, these accounts contradicted Daniel's claim that the incident was accidental. By the following morning, June 15, Daniel was taken into custody by Bahamian authorities. The resort staff confirmed to police that the couple had been experiencing visible tension throughout their stay. Fellow guests provided additional accounts of arguments and emotional distance between the two. News of Emily's death quickly reached her family in Canada. They were informed by officials and later traveled to the Bahamas to assist with arrangements. The sudden loss was devastating, particularly as Emily had spoken with them only days earlier, sharing her concerns but without suggesting that violence was imminent. Daniel's arrest drew significant attention from both Bahamian and Canadian media. The case highlighted not only the tragedy of a honeymoon turned fatal but also the challenges of handling legal matters across international boundaries. The climax of the story had unfolded over the course of less than an hour. A dinner, a walk, an argument, and the irreversible outcome. While the week had contained signs of growing instability, the final confrontation escalated rapidly, leaving no chance for reconciliation or intervention. For investigators, the central question was no longer whether a crime had occurred but rather the circumstances that led to Emily's death. The case moved swiftly from a honeymoon narrative to a criminal investigation, setting the stage for legal proceedings that would follow in the months ahead. This moment, marked by the fatal confrontation, represented the peak of the conflict that had been building throughout the trip. It was the point where private disagreements became public tragedy, with lasting consequences for families, the local community, and the broader public who followed the case through news reports. Following Daniel's arrest on June 15, 2017, the Bahamian authorities began their formal investigation. He was held in custody at a local detention facility while police collected statements from witnesses, gathered forensic evidence, and reviewed the sequence of events that led to Emily's death. The police report outlined key details. Emily had been found with injuries consistent with a violent altercation. Witnesses nearby confirmed hearing an argument followed by physical struggle. Security cameras in the area also captured partial footage of Daniel and Emily walking together shortly before the incident. These findings contradicted Daniel's initial statement that Emily had fallen accidentally. Within days, Daniel was formally charged with murder under Bahamian law. The charge meant he would face trial in the Bahamas, as the offense occurred within their jurisdiction. This development created immediate challenges for both his legal team and Emily's family, since the proceedings were to be conducted under a legal system different from Canada's. Emily's family traveled to the Bahamas shortly after the incident. Their primary focus was arranging for her remains to be returned to Canada for burial. The process involved coordination between Bahamian officials, Canadian authorities, and consular representatives. Emily's funeral was held in Toronto later that month, attended by family, friends, and co-workers. The service highlighted her contributions as a nurse and her close relationships with her loved ones. Meanwhile, Daniel remained in custody awaiting trial. His Canadian lawyers worked with Bahamian legal counsel to prepare his defense. The defense argued that Emily's death was not premeditated but the result of an accident during a heated argument. They requested that the charge be reduced from murder to manslaughter. The trial began several months later in Nassau. Proceedings were closely followed by local and international media. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and statements from resort staff to establish a pattern of conflict between Daniel and Emily throughout their honeymoon. They argued that the fatal incident was the culmination of escalating disputes. Key testimony came from residents near the crime scene who had heard shouting and observed a struggle. Their accounts directly challenged Daniel's claim that Emily had fallen on her own. Additionally, medical experts testified that Emily's injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall, supporting the prosecution's position that force had been involved. The defense sought to portray the incident as unplanned. Daniel took the stand, stating that he and Emily had been arguing and that she had slipped during the confrontation. He admitted that the argument had become physical but insisted that he did not intend to cause her death. His lawyers emphasized his lack of prior criminal history and argued that his emotional state during the honeymoon contributed to poor judgment. Throughout the trial, Emily's family attended the proceedings, listening as details of her final days were discussed. Their presence underscored the human impact of the case, reminding the court of the loss experienced beyond the legal questions. After several weeks of testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Daniel was found guilty of manslaughter, not murder. The court concluded that while he had caused Emily's death, there was insufficient evidence to prove premeditation. This distinction significantly affected the sentencing. In sentencing, the judge considered several factors: Daniel's lack of prior criminal record, the circumstances of the altercation, and the impact on Emily's family. Ultimately, Daniel was sentenced to 18 years in prison under Bahamian law. He was to serve his sentence in the Bahamas, with the possibility of later transfer to Canada under international agreements. The resolution of the case did not end the pain for Emily's family. While they expressed some relief that justice had been served, they also emphasized that no sentence could restore what had been lost. For them, the trial confirmed that Emily's life had ended as a result of violence during what should have been a celebration of her marriage. For Daniel's family, the outcome was equally devastating. They faced the reality of his lengthy imprisonment abroad and the public scrutiny that came with the case. While they maintained their support for him, they also acknowledged the seriousness of the court's decision. The Canadian public followed the trial with interest, as it highlighted the risks faced by travelers abroad when legal issues arise. Media coverage emphasized both the tragedy of the case and the complexities of handling cross-border justice. By the time the trial concluded, the narrative of a honeymoon gone wrong had been fully transformed into a criminal case with lasting consequences. The legal resolution established responsibility, but it also left open broader questions about relationships, conflict, and the pressures couples may face. Daniel began serving his sentence in Nassau's correctional facility, while Emily's family worked to preserve her memory in Canada. Colleagues at the hospital where she had worked organized a memorial in her honor, remembering her dedication to patients and her kindness toward others. The resolution of the case in court brought closure to the legal process but not to the emotional impact. For those involved, the events in the Bahamas would remain a permanent part of their lives, marked by loss, regret, and the enduring consequences of one fatal night. The case of Daniel and Emily's honeymoon tragedy in the Bahamas left lasting impacts that went beyond the courtroom and legal judgments. For many, the story became a reminder of how quickly moments of happiness could turn into loss, and how fragile life can be when unexpected violence occurs. Their families in Canada, who had been preparing for a future filled with celebrations, were instead forced to live with grief and unanswered questions about how a trip meant for love ended in such devastation. For Emily's parents, the tragedy was especially difficult to bear. They often spoke about how their daughter had dreamed of becoming a teacher and building a family of her own. The sudden loss not only took away their child but also the future she could have had. Friends and neighbors in their hometown organized vigils, lighting candles in memory of Emily, as a way to honor her life and bring comfort to the grieving family. Many in the community described the event as a wake-up call about the risks people sometimes overlook when traveling abroad, even to places that appear safe. Daniel's family faced a different but equally heavy reality. They had to deal with the fact that their son, once seen as a responsible and promising young man, was now defined by an act of violence. His parents struggled with conflicting emotions: sorrow for Emily's death, shame for what their son had done, and confusion about how to face the future. Some relatives distanced themselves, while others tried to provide support, but the weight of the tragedy followed them everywhere. The case showed how a single event can damage not only two lives but also entire families on both sides. The Canadian and Bahamian authorities also reflected on the broader lessons of the case. For the Bahamas, which depends heavily on tourism, the incident raised concerns about safety and the image of the islands as a peaceful destination. Officials made statements reassuring the public that violent acts like this were not common, but the story still raised awareness among travelers about the importance of caution, even in seemingly idyllic settings. For Canadian authorities, the case highlighted the challenges citizens face when crimes occur abroad, and the importance of providing support through consulates and legal assistance. Beyond the immediate circle of family and officials, the tragedy sparked discussions on a wider level. News outlets and commentators examined the pressures newlyweds might face, especially when adjusting to marriage. While not all disagreements lead to violence, the case became a reference point in conversations about emotional stress, communication, and the need for early intervention when warning signs appear. Some organizations began using the story in workshops and counseling sessions to stress the importance of conflict resolution and recognizing unhealthy relationship dynamics. On a personal level, those who knew Emily and Daniel before the tragedy were left to reconcile their memories with the harsh reality of what had happened. Friends recalled the times when the couple seemed happy and excited about their wedding, trying to understand how things had changed so suddenly. Many admitted they never imagined such an outcome was possible. This gap between appearances and reality served as a reminder that people often carry hidden struggles that others cannot see. As time passed, the case slowly faded from daily news but remained etched in the memory of those directly affected. For Emily's family, the impact was permanent, as every milestone in life, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, was marked by her absence. For Daniel, his years in prison became a constant reminder of the irreversible decision made in a moment of conflict. The tragedy became a symbol of how choices, especially in moments of anger, can create consequences that last a lifetime. In the end, the story of Daniel and Emily's honeymoon trip was remembered not only for its sadness but also for the lessons it left behind. It was a story that encouraged people to think carefully about relationships, communication, and the fragility of life. For some, it reinforced the importance of valuing every moment with loved ones. For others, it highlighted the responsibility of seeking help when facing personal struggles before they escalate into irreversible harm. Though the tragedy could not be undone, the reflections it left behind continued to shape conversations and remind people of the lasting effects of violence within families and relationships.